Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Deidre Garrett. I am the Director of HR Services and Organization Development here at MRA. We are excited for our Members Spotlight featuring M3 Insurance for our DEI Conference 2021. And today I'm joined by Alicia Kaiser, who is the VP of Human Resources. You've been at M3 Insurance for about 10 years.
10 years. Today's my anniversary.
Exciting!
Thank you.
And you're also leading the DEI efforts at M3 Insurance.
Right.
So I'm so excited to get into this with you today. Where did M3 begin its journey?
Yeah, so I can maybe comment on what I've experienced since I've been there in the last 10 years. And I think I remember really early on, we came across a white paper that talked about an organization's journey from being an exclusive organization to an inclusive organization. And I remember our journey starting by reading that white paper and being really real with ourselves on where we were at on that spectrum. And from there, then developing a plan kind of from where we were at to get to where we wanted to go, which was obviously being an inclusive organization. And what that journey's entailed since then has included really starting with a committee and a cross-functional committee working on I&D. And like probably many other organizations, we've hired consultants to provide training for our whole company, for our leadership team, for our executive leadership team. We've changed a lot of our recruiting practices as well. So, where we recruit, the words that we use in job postings, things like that. But in terms of where we're at today, right now we're working on kind of repurposing our committee. It's really hard for a committee of cross-functional employees at all levels of the organization to make the type of impact on inclusion and diversity that we want to see. And so we're going to be shifting that committee to be more focused on education and awareness around inclusion and diversity. We're developing a I&D leadership steering group, if you will, that will be myself, our CEO, and some other folks on our senior leadership team. To really talk about how do we make I&D not just a responsibility of the committee, but a responsibility of the entire leadership team. And one of the things that we're going to be starting this quarter, or this year, I should say, is asking our leadership team to incorporate some element of I&D in their own business plan for their own department. Could be focused on themselves, it could be focused on their team, but we want to make sure we're kind of infusing it wherever possible.
I like the fact that you said you're trying to integrate it throughout your entire organization, because as we know, DEI needs to really kind of permeate throughout your culture to really make the impact that you need it to. So the business case, obviously, for M3 to really be involved or to launch a DEI strategy is obviously very compelling. But what's the other side of it that has really steered you and your other leaders in this direction?
Yeah, I think, and one thing I didn't mention when I talked about our journey was our Women's Business Resource Group. That's been probably one of our most successful, I would call it initiatives, but it's so much more than that at this point. We started that in 2018. But I'll maybe use that as an example if I could. So I really can't afford not to, right? When you think about, I'll focus on women in this instance, over 50% of our employee population are female. And for us not to listen, not to make sure that we're keeping, that subset of our employee population engaged and able to bring their whole selves to work, so they say, it's really not an option. I think additionally, outside of employee engagement, revenue, top line revenue. For M3, our clients and prospects, our buyers, usually the decision makers when it comes to commercial insurance, are typically CFOs or presidents or owners of companies. And we're seeing those roles being increasingly more held by women. And there are a lot more questions than there once were around what M3, what's your strategy around inclusion and diversity? And not only do they want to understand what M3 strategy is, they want to see the results of that strategy in the work that we do for them, in the M3ers, in the M3 employees that we put in front of them to help them work on their risk management and insurance. And so, I mean, those are a couple things that I think about in terms of the business case.
So let's dig into your women's resource group, which I think is awesome. What was the moment in which you and other leaders decided within your organization that you wanted to launch this group? Were you receiving feedback? Kind of where did that start?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I mentioned we launched it in 2018, but we've been talking about it. We talked about it for years before that. And 2018 felt like the right time for a couple different reasons. I think internally, there was a little bit more interest and maybe some questions being asked around affinity groups in general. Also, from a recruitment perspective, we had a lot of candidates that were asking about, what we're doing around inclusion and diversity. And of course, we could talk about the committee and some other things that we did. But they were asking about, women on our board, women on our executive leadership team. And so really just kind of like putting that all in a blender, it felt like the right time that we had the audience that we were needing to kind of really get it off the ground. We finally had that audience and that excitement around it.
That is awesome. I think that you guys paid attention to those signs. And I think there are a lot of candidates who it's one of their main questions when they're finding a new employer. What are you doing around DEI? And I'm interested to learn more about some of the work that the Women's Resource Group has done and even how is it being championed within the organization, whether it be from an executive leadership standpoint or identifying different allies within the organization.
Absolutely. I'm very passionate about our Women's Business Resource Group. So we have about 20% of our employee population, both men and women, who are now engaged in some capacity in our Women's Business Resource Group, which is really fun and really exciting. The women, so we have 3 committees, and everyone who's a part of the Women's Business Resource Group sits on one of those 3 committees. And the committees are Career, which is focused on providing professional development opportunities for women. That might be speakers, that might be projects, it might be discussions, whatever feels appropriate, I guess. Then we have the Community Committee, which is focused on partnering with community organizations with a similar mission to our Women's Business Resource Group to kind of have that external connection. And then finally, we have the Commerce Committee, which is a committee that exists to figure out how to give the members of the Women's Business Resource Group, specifically the women members, an opportunity to make a more global impact on the organization. So, a lot of us are, in our roles, making a huge impact in the customers or the clients that we serve in our key roles. But this is really finding an opportunity to give women more exposure throughout the organization and make an impact in maybe some different areas. So that's kind of how the committee or how the Women's Business Resource Group is structured. In terms of some of the key highlights that I would want to share in terms of what the group has done over the last couple of years, I think the first has been really just engaging our entire organization more in some of the topics and issues that are important to women. And again, this hasn't just been with women. There have been men M3ers that have participated in those conversations, but they're conversations that I don't think have ever happened before within the 4 walls of the organization. And I could go on and on about that, but just to keep it at a high level, some really, really good discussion there. And second, we actually hosted an event, an external event for clients, prospects, community members focused on women in the workplace. And this was, I think, in 2019. And it was hosted by the Women's Business Resource Group, planned, executed, And our marketing and events team told us that it was one of the events that we held, and there was obviously a maximum capacity. We did it within our office. It filled up, it was one of the events that filled up fastest of all the events that we've hosted at M3, which is super exciting. And obviously a topic that community, clients, prospects are all thinking about and looking for help and partnership on as well. So that was super exciting. And then most recently, the Women's Business Resource Group created support groups in COVID. And we had a number of different support groups, which support groups meant let's just get together and talk via Zoom, because that's really all we could do. But some people struggled with isolation during that time. Some people struggled with managing virtual learning, a bunch of kids running around, and a full-time demanding job. Mm-hmm. Some people struggled with, grief and loss during that time. And so the Women's Business Resource Group saw that need and, created those groups to really support M3ers and make sure the right conversations were happening.
That's awesome, because in light of COVID, I think it's the stat is like nearly 3 million women have left the workforce, which is pretty staggering. So what is your organization doing to be, more attractive, but also offer flexibility to women in the workplace when you just talked about your last session? Because we think of, there are just many barriers when we think of taking a job. As a mom or as a woman. So what are the things that M3 is doing to really offer that, I don't want to say advantages, but more so offering great opportunities to women? Yeah.
I mean, it's so hard. It's something that we talk about. I just had a conversation with one of our executives yesterday about it. So it's ongoing, right? It's never like a check the box type of a thing, but some of the things, I think one of the things that has helped M3 is that we've always been a family first organization pre-COVID. From the very top. I mean, we can all see each other's calendars, and you can certainly see kids concerts and coaching engagements amongst our executive leadership team. It's encouraged. Family first is always been a part of our culture, so that's helpful. Because that's kind of the foundation that we're working off of, right? But a number of years ago, definitely pre-COVID, I would say 5, 6, 7 years ago, we really put a push towards being mobile and flexible. So I wouldn't say it's as an extreme of a hybrid or work from home type flexible work arrangement as what we're experiencing now. But we did engage in that a number of years ago because we felt like that was important to attract and retain talent. And so again, having a foundation pre-COVID certainly helped us launch into an even more productive hybrid work environment through COVID, and then to support everyone post-COVID. We offer parental leave, so paid parental leave for all parents, and I think that those are some of the key areas. And as I mentioned, I think those discussion groups that came out of the Women's Business Resource Group around isolation and virtual learning and all those sorts of things, I certainly think that's something that's been additive and helpful for people as they navigate through all of this.
So you mentioned for the Women's Resource Group, it sounds like there is female but also male members. So what's the role of the male members in the Women's Resource Group?
We really encourage our male M3ers to be a part of those meetings and those discussions, because our belief as a group is that we're really not going to move the needle unless they can be a part of that and learn from that and impact that. And so there are a few discussions where we might choose to only include women, but for the most part, we want the guys there. And the way that we've approached that has been, we asked our entire Women's Business Resource Group to go out and have a conversation with a guy or two and invite them personally, face-to-face, pre-COVID, to attend these meetings and share more why behind the what, like why it's important for you as a male to be there, and why I, as your friend and your coworker, really would like you to be there. Additionally, I invite our entire leadership team to each of the meetings and give a blurb about like why it would be helpful and educational and impactful for them to be there. So it's not just another meeting invite that gets sent their way. And so far, it's been really effective, and the guys that have attended have been super engaged. I think they've done a really good job just listening and asking questions. And I think about what we've all been going through with COVID, but what a lot of women have been going through in taking on a lot of the virtual learning and other responsibilities that have increased through the pandemic. A lot of our male members of our leadership team are looking for help on how to support their female direct reports. And so I think they're genuinely interested in listening and being part of those conversations.
That's awesome, because I think it's great that you and your leadership team are committed to making sure that you're creating an inclusive environment, as you said, so people can bring their whole selves to work, but you're also creating an opportunity for people to even be attracted to your environment if they're not there already, and they're looking for a great employer who can also support them in their career. So thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because that's certainly what we're striving for. So appreciate it.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.